Welcome to the Base Strength Podcast. I'm your host, Alex Bromley. Thank you for joining me today. The topic at hand is burnout. This is something that affects everybody if you've been committed to something long enough, if you have competed for a period of time, trained for a period of time. Eventually, the monotony of committing to the same thing over and over, day in, day out, will start to wear on you. The honeymoon stage goes away, that shiny sheen of infatuation dissipates, and you're left with the underlying crusty, unwashed reality of what committing yourself to something long-term actually looks like. There are probably some parallels to marriage to be made there, but I'm not going to make them because I like sleeping in my bed at night. So understanding what causes burnout and how to avoid it, and understanding that it's an inevitability. It's something that you're probably going to deal with at some point. That's going to go a long way to making sure that long-term you don't look back at the end and have all this regret for all of this stalled progress and all of this like starting and stopping that goes on. I want to make sure that you don't fall into a deep depression, that you don't stay in your living room with the lights off, calling off work so you can wrap up in your Snuggie and binge old episodes of The Office. Okay, you don't want the Ben & Jerry's ice cream cartons sprinkled all over your carpet. You want to make sure you take care of your cats. You don't want to neglect them, right? And also that you don't lose your gains. More importantly than all of that, you want to make sure you don't lose your gains. So we're going to address burnout right now. Burnout is a lack of motivation, drive, or desire to continue. That's pretty self-explanatory. Once you do something so often, that feeling of getting burnt and just not wanting to do the bare minimum. You don't even want to look at it. The idea of interacting with this activity, it just puts you off. There's so many other things you have to do, or you're so tired, or life stress is starting to get to you, or you're just tired of hurting all the time, whatever it is, you feel it in like your gut, where like normally you would be inclined to get really excited to go out and do this thing. Now there's just this like, it's like pouring salt on a slug. You just kind of recoil and you cringe at the thought of doing this thing. So it's very visceral, and that impacts every decision you make. Obviously the big decisions like actually getting in the car and going to the gym, but little stuff day to day that you kind of rely on to reinforce this base behavior. So your workouts get really lackadaisical. You often skip them. The quality of work can suffer. And that's a big thing. It's one thing to like just show up. It's like, well, at least I got to the gym. But if the quality of the workout's suffering or you lose direction, there's a point where it's like, what's the point of all this? And you'll feel that too. You'll be like, well, my workouts suck. Why am I even going? And that impacts results. And it can be a result of physical and psychological factors. I mean, physical factors is just like beating yourself down with the same stress over and over. That monotonous tone of stress, once it starts to like outpace your ability to recover if you're doing too much, or once external factors, life factors start to wear on you, physically, that can give you a negative result. And when that bears out week after week after week, it starts to weigh on you and it starts to change your perception. The psychological factors, I mean, it can be not hitting the goals that you wanted. It could be a lot of stagnation. It could be stress. If you have crisis in your personal life, your work life is bearing on you. All of these things start to change your association. And again, you get that kind of visceral gut punch that prevents you from doing this thing that maybe you once took so much joy in. So the balance of stress and recovery, and then stress recovery novelty, the SRN model, is what I talk about when considering adjustments to be made to your program. Those are like the three big variables that you want to focus on changing when you're addressing a problem or going through a phase switch. Stress and recovery are the big ones for this particularly, because the physical components of under recovery or feeling worn down, stress has to tick up to get this adaptive response. But if stress ticks up at a rate that outpaces your ability to recover, you're left in the red. You know what I mean? You're left with this deficit. You're in debt to your own body. You can't make up that ground, and you never actually end up adapting so that the workouts get easier. That's a big problem, and that could be responsible for burnout. Novelty is another factor. That's needed long-term to prevent diminished returns, to prevent stagnation. So that's a staple of your programming anyways. There should be periodic inclusion of novel stressors, but psychologically, that monotony of training can be like Chinese water torture. And it's one of the downfalls of programs like, I don't know, starting strength, really simple LPs, or if you've ever done programs that just have a ton of volume, just a lot of repeating sets of the same few lifts, that gets really hard to deal with long term. And you're not wrong in feeling that way. And I'll argue later that there's a certain factor of fun in training that you should pay attention to. Training shouldn't just be like, self-flagellation as you pray in the corner, punishment for your sins. There is a point where you do have to commit to doing the hard work that maybe you don't want to do, but training as a whole should be a net positive, and there's no reason you can't enjoy it. There's enough different ways to attack it. There's no reason that you can't structure it so it's actually enjoyable. So the solution is you need to change your workouts to give yourself a break if the beatdown of stress and the under recovery is contributing to that, or even if life is contributing to the under recovery. And you also need a win. And this is something that people will go a long time without. And it's why they cheat in their training and try to do ego stuff to force like fake wins. You need a win in the sense that you need to commit to something for a few weeks, see how you progress, see how you PR in something maybe. Maybe you check this thing off your bucket list, or maybe that you go into a meet and you actually do well. You need to organize your training in a way that you're actually proving to yourself on a regular basis why it feels good to do this, why you do the work, what the end result is, to redefine that association, to reinforce it. So I recommend you first focus on the physical components. I think that's the most important thing because those are often the things that can be taking you out at the knees. And you need to address the physical components anyways if you want your training to be productive long term. So first focus on the physical stuff. You want to assume that not maintaining physical activity, it's just not an option because your instinct is going to be to keep you out of the gym. So reinforce yourself that this just simply is not an option. You absolutely have to get into the gym or else you're going to feel worse. I mean, however bad you feel right now, you feel worse if you do nothing. It doesn't mean you have to go in and go ham, but commit that, okay, a few times a week, it's just bare minimum. I have to at least get the bare minimum regardless of what I do. And if you don't, and this is common, you get into this dysfunctional cycle of like starting and stopping. It creates more anxiety. It's like developing a food disorder, but with training. You don't want to do that. So understand, take pressure off yourself. Say, at the very least, I got to get in. That's best all the way around. So addressing the problems in the workout under recovery, if you can identify the features of your training that might be contributing to too much stress, if you train too often, if you're one of these guys that uses training as self-harm with long marathon workouts and everything's one more rep, brother, just got to train for one more rep. That's stacking stress with no end in sight. And that means going back to the drawing board. Do you need deloads? Do you need to space efforts further apart? If it's not fun or enjoyable, is the training monotonous? Do you need a training program that puts in variability, even at the expense of progress? Even if you think it's not ideal, a bit of variability and fun for the sake of it is going to be much more important if monotonous training is keeping you out of the gym. So it's not about what's optimal. It's about what you're actually going to do and commit to long term. And then too much complexity. That's a common one. If you have programs that are just layered with, double and triple progressions, and you have exotic movements, or if you have things that seem like you're building a house of cards, like the longer you go, the farther you are out on that tightrope, and any stumble, you're just starting at square one. And training is not like that, shouldn't be seen like that. So a lot of times people just get in their own head and they try to incorporate way too much complexity, and that's something that can be addressed. Life events, this is pretty straightforward. I mean, you all know the stuff that stresses you out. Too much time at work, too much time on your feet, too much labor, not getting enough sleep, not eating enough. Again, planning. It's probably the best thing. Plan ahead, pack your food ahead of time. You have to eat. Undereating isn't an option. Undersleeping isn't an option. And generally planning ahead and sacrificing like evening events, that's going to go a long way. Even if it's just a couple times a week, maybe not every single night. You're not going to get 8 hours every night, but a couple nights a week. Make sure you catch up on that shit. Socks. Good God. Physical labor, good shoes, good socks. I worked in a restaurant for 6 years. By no means hard physical labor, but it is a lot of time on your feet. And compression socks, making sure my shoes were good, making sure I had inserts, went a hugely long way. And part of it, it's not just your feet hurting, which sucks. That kills you. But I heard a podcast where some guy was going off. I don't know if it's bro science bullshit, but he was talking about your lymphatic system and flushing fluids in and out. And when you're on your feet for a long time and fluid starts to pool, it's like hard on your immune system. And that when he travels, he uses compression socks to keep his lymphatic system alive and operating well. If you've ever gotten off a plane and seen your ankles swollen, I have that problem bad. So now I wear compression socks on a plane. So if you're doing a lot of labor and you're on your feet, compression socks, good shoes. I'm telling you, that can be a game changer by itself. Limit dependency on caffeine. First ritual, I mean, I wake up and I get a cup of coffee, then a Monster. That's really no bueno. If I worked a hard job, I would probably save caffeine for later in the day or for times where I had to be productive doing this instead of doing it just to get through your job. You're going to perform at your job either way. But if you pound 2 rock stars early in the day, you're not going to do it later at night, or that's not a good idea anyway. So kind of save it, choose which hills you die on with regards to super loading caffeine. Plan ahead, stay nourished throughout your workday. Don't go long periods of time fasting. That's a bad idea. And then address injury or overuse issues. That's a big problem. You get little bumps and bruises, tears, scar tissue, shit doesn't heal. That's a very big problem, and it can be a pain in the ass. So you can switch training to prioritize away from it. So if you have, let's say, hip problems, your IT band just hurts like hell. Well, maybe you're not best off chasing that big squat PR you want. Maybe find something else to prioritize that you can get excited about training that's not going to make you feel like dog shit while you do other things to manage this other problem area. You can experiment with gentler forms of training. Give yourself permission to cruise. This is something people struggle with. To address a problem, it's absolutely okay to not hit the gas every single time you're in the gym. So I've used banded work. I've used high rep cable and machine work, stuff to get around problem areas, make training feel good. So I leave with a pump and full of blood in the painful areas. Well, they're not as aggravated, as opposed to doing just the heavy barbell work I was so accustomed to. And it takes some time to switch that in your head. But for a short period of time, that can be the thing that saves you and lets those issues clear out. And that can be a big physical and psychological relief. After you get your training straightened out, make those few basic changes, get excited to chase new goals. Now you can address the mental aspect, which involves changing your association with training. Remember, the goal isn't just to get life to cooperate. If you're waiting for life to be perfect or to have that opportunity where things just line up right and it's convenient, you're going to be shit out of luck. You're going to be on your deathbed with your dick in your hand because you waited 80 years for something to happen that's just not going to happen. Life won't cooperate with you. You have to find better coping mechanisms. You have to find better ways to plan. You have to be a logistical machine. And don't let that overwhelm you. It's easy. It's straightforward. It's doable. Everybody does it. You just have to make it mandatory. No matter how stressful the job you jumped into is, you figured it out at some point. So you just have to make it a priority. Trust me, if I can do it, you all can do it. I've known people that were absolute meatheads that made this stuff work. It's just about habits. So speaking of habits, that's the single most powerful approach to giving yourself a break and retooling your associations. That's why habits are in the title or like front page of every self-help book that's ever existed, every entrepreneurial book that's ever existed. They talk about habits because we live in a motivation culture. Well, it's probably changing with the flood of self-help books that everybody's super familiar with. But for the longest time, it was motivation. It was, how do I get hyped up? How do I get aggressive? How do I channel into and unlock this dragon of productivity that's going to fly into the sky and unleash this fire and scorch the earth and kill my enemies, and everything's going to have Dragon Force playing up to 11 in the background. Like, no, motivation is not the point. Motivation will come naturally when you start to get those positive associations and you start to get those wins. Motivation will come naturally, and you can use it for all it's worth when it does, but don't bank on it and understand that you don't need it to perform, and you need to break that association. Habits, it's like brushing your teeth. How many times a day do you brush your teeth? Well, it should be 2 to 3. If you're not, go rinse out that stank breath. If you tell somebody from a different culture, I don't know, tell somebody who's homeless, tell somebody who hasn't really prioritized brushing their teeth their entire life, that, hey, you got to do this thing 2 to 3 times a day, every day for the rest of your life, and it's going to taste weird, and it's going to interrupt your meals, and it's going to cost money. People will look at you like you're crazy. Like, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to remember that. I'm not going to prioritize that. But think of the fact that you've done this every day since you got taught to as a small child, hopefully. If not, go have a talking to with your parents. the fact that you've been able to do this so consistently for so long just speaks to how powerful habits are. If you ingrain it as a must and you remove the emotion, you avoid that complex you get. You just say, like in your Spock voice, your horrible artificial intelligence voice, this is something I do. Period. That's it. It ends there. Every time you do it, you reinforce the habit. Eventually you do it in your sleep. You don't think about it. So we're building habits here. So remember, when that gut feeling tries to keep you out of the gym, when you think about going in and working out and everything just kind of collapses, you're like, oh, I just want to get some hot cocoa and sit on the couch and scroll through my phone and look at videos of my ex. Once you get to that point, every time your brain goes to that dark point where motivation just gets sucked out, you lose the wind out of your sails. Remember that that is not a prerequisite for doing things you need to do in life. It's not a prerequisite for going to work. It's not a prerequisite for being good to your loved ones. Habits, make it routine and remove emotion from it. Other helpful things, gratitude. And it's not the suck it up and be thankful approach. This isn't to like talk down to you, like be grateful for what you have. Gratitude is a very powerful thing that people don't exercise. Yes, it can always be worse. And yes, stress is relative. So you base your stress based off what you're used to. That's homeostasis. Well, think about all the people in other cultures, not to sound like your grandma telling you to finish your plate. Think about all the people in other cultures that would kill and have killed and have risked their lives to have a piece of what you have. And think about how your life could potentially be so much more pampered and better to where the stress you're dealing with now would seem unacceptable. It's all relative. So understand, be grateful for the things you do have in your corner, and that will help retool your associations. You get a better result when you start with gratitude. That's why it's important. Understand the alternative. Like getting frustrated, taking your ball and going home is going to lead to a bad result. You're going to feel worse and you're going to be starting from square one. Think logistically. Remember, think in your Spock voice. Always try to solve problems, implement habits, remove emotion, and learn to cruise. Give yourself permission to do the bare minimum. Let yourself restore, recover, regroup, and then find a new plan of attack. You don't always have to be hitting the gas. In fact, it's often counterproductive to do so. Deloads are great. Different stimulus that's going to switch which structures get stressed. That's great. And focusing on individual priorities and training, not trying to do everything all at once. That's great. Have one pet project. Get comfortable just doing the homework for everything else. That's perfectly fine. Thank you for your attention. Your attention is always appreciated. If you want more, we have close to 900 members on our Base Strength forum on Facebook. Check that out. I pop in daily. There's forum checks. There's program discussion. If you want explanations of the cryptic shit that pops up in my books, people are there, students of the craft, ready to answer your questions. Support me through Patreon and YouTube memberships, Doesn't have to be both. That's huge. It allows me to do this and put out this content. I appreciate everybody that helps with that. Base strength, peak strength, superior deadlift at my store, EmpireBarbellStore.com. And reach out to me. If you want a template, I offer templates and offer mentorship. They're distinctly different. Mentorship's very hands-on. If you want some direction, check out EmpireBarbellStore.com or DM me directly and we'll get started on that. Thanks so much, guys. Until next time, this is Bromley. I'll see you.